I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Evidently, the White House getting tremendous accolades. Tremendous accolades from politicians and the people. Evidently, he said, the Donald says, we're ready. We're ready for the hurricane. Tremendous accolades. Really? Really? You haven't done anything yet. How can you get tremendous accolades for doing nothing? They've done nothing. And this is the really just bizarre part of all of this to me. And this is where, you know, Trump world just, again, makes me just crazy in that, you know, the level of failure, mind-blowing, just absolutely mind-blowing. And yet, tremendous accolades. We find out that evidently the administration had moved some money from one pocket to another, away from FEMA and towards ICE. We're gonna lock up people, strip kids from their families, and do all that stuff. $10 million taken, according to Jeff Merkley. Surprised? No, not even a little bit. Now, the Department of Homeland Security, and FEMA, they're pushing back, saying, well, you know, it's only a small amount. It's not going to change our operational, you know, blah, blah, blah. None of that. And, you know, as I've been watching the reports of this, and I have been spending the day, because, you know, my father-in-law evidently has decided to be one of those folks who's going to ride it out in South Carolina. I've been watching the news coverage, and I'm going, you know what? I really have no faith in this administration to help him or anyone else who stays. So get out. Get out while you still can. I have no faith in this administration to do anything. I mean, I don't think they can put together a picnic to the zoo. I don't. I mean, now, understand, it'll be the most tremendous picnic ever. And the ants were the biggest ever, and you know, it's just gonna, you name it, it was the best, and more ants than the other picnics, and you can imagine, because we've seen this movie over and over again, and even, you know, today doubling down on, you know, on Puerto Rico, and doubling down on you know, their version of reality. And I guess that's the way I got to look at it. It's their version of reality. It's how they justify it. I don't even know if it matters if it's based in any bit of reality, or if it's based in any bit of anything you can verify. Because look, you remember after Puerto Rico, they were, you know, tickled. You know, only 64 people died. We now find out it was more than 3,000. We find out that, you know, the response was botched, and, you know, and look, it's a disaster, and I get that. And this is why you need to have people who, this is what they do. This is why it's important to have career bureaucrats. This is why it's important to have a government with a knowledge center. And you can go through agency after agency or department by department and go, this is the reason you have people who, this is what they spent their lives doing. This is their specialty. This is why we bring them in and we hold on to them and we train them so that it doesn't matter who's sitting in the Oval Office or what political hack is leading the agency. The boots on the ground, the people who are getting their hands dirty, they're the folks who know how to get things done. So even if you have a doofus like Michael Brown and Bush with a heck of a job, Brownie, or the Orange Menace, the things still get done because you have institutional knowledge. Now, the thing that's really always has freaked me out about this administration is I know they claim they're going to put in the best people, which, were basically political hacks. We're going to make patronage great again, which they have done. Give them credit. Give credit where credit is due. They took care of all their political hacks. And they're not alone. Everyone does it. But they don't put them, generally, you don't put your political hacks into key roles of safety like emergency response, unless you're Bush. So maybe I take that back. But, here's the thing. And the problem is you can see these reports all the time. Half of these roles are unfilled. So there's literally nobody leading some of this stuff. And again, this is my problem with having someone who doesn't believe in government and doesn't understand government running it. I'm as fearful of overreaching government as anyone. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that the roads are plowed, that the bridges don't collapse, and that when we have a disaster, that there's going to be someone there with a little bit of understanding on how this is done, maybe some institutional knowledge of how it's been done in the past, maybe understanding the mistakes that they've made in the past so that you don't make them again. Now, to the credit of FEMA, they actually did a look back at Hurricane Maria. They actually took a look back at Puerto Rico and said, well, we didn't do really well. We kind of screwed this up. We kind of screwed up, and here's where we screwed up. And they good on them for at least having the wherewithal to say, you know what, we could have done things better. There were a lot of things that we didn't do well, that we need to do better next time. And that's kind of what you want, and good on them for doing it. But the administration is saying, it was the best ever. It was tremendous. And there's no introspective. There's no ability to look at it and go, okay, well, things went poorly in certain areas. I think all Trump thinks about is, that he was able to throw paper towels at people or put three boxes in the back of a truck. And, again, I don't know that that's the best resource. 'Cause I remember mocking him at the time. As someone who has spent my entire life in the trucking industry, 3 boxes in the back of a pickup is not an efficient use of a vehicle. I'm just saying. I mean, especially when you need massive amounts of support, that thing should have been stacked high and tight. There should have been tons of stuff in there as he was rolling down the road. But no, 3 boxes in the back, and here, 1 in the cab. Which you go, I don't know why you would do that, but okay. Nice job, Donnie. You tried. But here again, this is why I'm. If you're in North Carolina, you're in South Carolina, you're in the path of this, and you hear this, get out. Because I have almost no faith in this federal government to react in a way that is going to be helpful. Now, there's the other side of it, that there's part of me that says maybe we shouldn't. I don't want first responders who stayed because they know some idiot's going to stay behind. So go, gather the sheep, get out. The other big story today, and there have been a bunch of them, but the other big story is the executive order. Trump signed an executive order, I guess, that would authorize additional sanctions against countries or individuals or governments or corporations or whomever and I don't quite know who deems this, who figures this out, who the decider guy is. Maybe it's Trump in his bathrobe. I don't know. Maybe it's a dartboard. Who knows? But evidently this executive order will give us the ability to put sanctions on anyone who meddles in future elections. And as I'm reading through the stories on this, I'm going, except the people who actually screwed up our election. Except, I guess we're not going to go after them because you have Trump who, literally looked him in the eye and said, I don't know why you do it. And then I guess, there was the whole wouldn't, I don't know. But this is window dressing. Another failure of our Congress to act. Another one of these political theater things, these stunts, so that come election time they go, oh, look, we tried. To me, nothing here. Now, will they use it? Yeah, maybe against some small little country that we can maybe if North Korea gets out of hand and Kim Jong-un doesn't send him another Valentine. I don't know. Maybe that would be maybe the jilted lover kind of thing would precipitate our putting more sanctions based on this. Because look, North Korea does it. The Chinese do it. The Russians certainly have been doing it for a very long time. Who are we going to put the sanctions on and when? And did we just give him another tool to start another war? Don't know. But it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Now, John Bolton said the criticism of the president unwarranted because he hasn't been too deferential to the Russians. He hasn't, bent over backwards to appease the Putin, even though, you look at the Helsinki summit and you go major brown-nosed moment. Not looking presidential at all. Sorry, not going there. And actually looking like submissive. So lots to talk about, lots to get to. Just a weird, bizarre day. But again, if you're in North Carolina or South Carolina, you should be heading out down the road. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're in the area and you're staying, I'd love to know why. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about something going on in Ohio. I've said for a while I'm harder on Democrats than I am on Republicans. I expect Republicans to hate their campaign workers and to hate workers in general. But evidently there's a story in Ohio where the Ohio Democratic Party is pushing back against the Campaign Workers Guild, they're trying to organize campaign workers so you can't work them 100 hours a week and pay them poverty wages, that kind of stuff. Maybe just a couple of rules in place to make sure that people aren't exploited. We'll get some thoughts on what's going on in Ohio and why the Campaign Workers Guild is something that is needed and something that should be across the board for not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Time to talk.
Then workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day the United Rubber Workers Union was founded in Akron, Ohio. Akron was the rubber capital of the world. All the major companies were there: Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, and General Tire. In Akron alone, there were more than 40,000 rubber workers and thousands more throughout the country. After 30 years of struggling to build the union, hopes of organizing the industry were finally made real. The founding of the International came after a successful strike the year before. But the union was born amid growing tensions within the AFL. These were the years of industrial organizing that rivaled the exclusive skilled craft unions. Growing demands to organize the mass industries would explode the next month at the historic AFL convention in Atlantic City. The tensions between AFL leaders and rubber workers delegates gave a taste of things to come. At the founding convention, rubber workers delegates opposed a number of AFL leaders' demands. The AFL insisted on appointing officers. They threatened to withdraw financial assistance when the delegates demanded democratic elections. But AFL leaders backed off when unionists from across the city protested. Then, delegates voted down an AFL constitutional clause proposal to bar communists from the union. They also refused AFL orders to organize on anything less than a total industry basis. Organizing skilled workers into the United Rubber Workers became a contentious issue at the October AFL convention. It led to the fistfight between Carpenters leader Bill Hutchison and Mine Workers president John Lewis, which precipitated the AFL split. By the following spring, the new United Rubber Workers Union would lead another successful strike that put it firmly among the industrial unions of the CIO.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So you may remember, and I think we talked about this about a month ago, that the Ohio Democratic Party had recognized campaign workers as bargaining unit members, and that they were going to sit down and bargain in good faith to make sure that workers weren't exploited, that they got reasonable bit of pay, maybe, who knows, maybe even some kind of benefit, some kind of way that you can actually eke out an existence while working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week, as you do in these campaigns. And anyone who's worked on a campaign knows that they're extraordinarily long days, and there's 7-day weeks, and there's no time off for any other bit of living. And I've said for years, there's got to be a way that somehow with all the money that goes into campaigns and TV ads, that people actually I don't know, get paid something reasonable and maybe a day off occasionally. And this is why I'm surprised that the latest story that I've heard is that the Ohio Democratic Party is now pushing back on some of that, and maybe not holding up their end of the bargain, which is something you expect from Republicans. But come on, Democrats, what's up? Which is why I've asked Sarah Willenbrink to come talk with us. She's a member of the Campaign Workers Guild, also a regional field director there with the Ohio Democratic Party. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, yeah, of course.
So am I getting this right? You guys voted overwhelmingly to join the Campaign Workers Guild. The party, kind of said, yep, okay, fine. And now not so much?
Yeah, I mean, so our union was recognized on July 27th, and we were voluntarily recognized. But at this point, we're sitting at the bargaining table, and what we're finding is that the ODP is really pushing back on a lot of what workers need to make this career something that's sustainable. And for us, it's just pretty unacceptable that they would be doing this.
What do you say to the person, though, Sarah, who says, well, it's not a career. This is democracy. This is your civic responsibility. And this isn't a lifelong career.
See, for me, that's really troubling. As someone who, I'm a little bit older than maybe your average bear in campaigns. I have a family. And I do this work really specifically because I think that there needs to be talent in field and in campaigns in general. I think that folks often forget that campaigns can really be pipelines into making great Democratic candidates and great progressive candidates. So for me, it really is a career. This is what I want to do with my life. I want to make sure that we have a democracy that works. I want to make sure that we're electing good candidates, right? And it's not something that, maybe traditionally people burn out after a couple of cycles, but it's also burnout. It's also because this work is incredibly taxing, and because, to be quite frank, I think that campaigns are exploitative in the way that they treat their workers. And it is, in fact, this exploitation that makes it really hard to actually have a career in campaigns.
Yeah, but what do you say to the person who says these aren't jobs? These are, this is civic engagement. Because most people think campaign workers are volunteers, and because we've all gone in and we've stuffed envelopes and we've knocked on doors, and we've seen this kind of stuff. And look, I think a lot of people think it's it's part of being a citizen, and it's part of being part of helping out the candidate, and not so much a job.
Yeah, I mean, so there is a part of it, right? And that is that. But to be quite frank, there's also a lot of work that goes into making sure that volunteers have the information and the packets that they need to knock doors, right? Those letters that you're stuffing, who's printing them? I mean, that by and large is paid campaign staff. And campaigning has the potential to be a career. You know, we don't want to lose people who are really passionate about building volunteer teams and building up the infrastructure that makes campaigns work, right? And at this point, with the hours and the pay, it's just not something that can be sustained. I think that, by and large, this is a career, right, that draws people who are really socially minded and who really take their activism very seriously. You know, and that's just kind of who we are as people. But I do think that it's the industry that has really made it something that just tends to be a one or two off job and not a career.
Yeah, I got to throw a couple other, of these, because I've heard all of these things, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on them. The other one being that, these are entry level jobs. You're getting in with a candidate so that maybe you get a job in their office. This is how patronage happens. So you pay your dues, and this is how you pay your dues.
Yeah, and I think that does happen, right? But then there are also people like me who really care about, campaigns and who care about electing Democrats and electing progressives. And for me, I don't want to work in a politician's office. I want to keep engaging folks at the grassroots level to make sure that we're getting great candidates elected. And, there are those people, right? Like, I know them. But I think that there are also a lot of people who are really dedicated to campaigns and who want to stay working in campaigns.
Right. Last one of these before I ask you some other things about about what's going on, because this is the big one that I get is how are the Democrats going to compete with Republicans who aren't going to play by the same rules? We know they're not. Given the limited amount of resources, because then everyone's saying, well, you're going to want you're going to price yourself out of jobs. You're going to want $15 an hour per shaw. You're going to want health care. You're going to want a bit of retirement security. You're going to want a day off. Whereas the Republicans aren't going to give their workers that. What do you say to the competitive angle?
Hey, I think that the best way to be competitive is to treat your workers right and to give workers what they deserve. If you want to talk about making sure that there's competition in the campaign industry, like create an industry that treats its workers well, that keeps talent in campaigns, so that this cycle, right, and the next cycle, we're making sure that we have people who are really well trained up, right, so that that entry level position, like there's space for growth and there's room for growth and there's sustainability in it, so that people aren't just burning out after one or two cycles.
Yeah, so let me ask you about what's going on in Ohio, because it seems to me that the Democrats should just have gone along with this, just because of the visual. When I first saw the story that they were using, I guess, some Republican law firm and some things like this, I go, really? Do they not get the optics of this? This is not good for Democrats to be pulling. Share with me what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, so the first bargaining session that we had, we showed up to bargain, and the executive director of the party, Greg Beswick, was there. Zach West, who does their operations and is also their in-house counsel, and a few other people from the ODP. So and Mike Bentel, who is a Democrat, but he's a lawyer. He does work for Taft, which I refer to as Taft-Hartley, because that is the namesake of that particular law. Correct. But he's an environmental lawyer, right? So he does solar regulations for the most part, I believe. So they sat across from us. They basically refused to bargain until they saw our full CBA. We caucused. We talked about it. We decided to turn it over after we knew when we were bargaining. So the next time we bargain, we are told to go to a very fancy law firm in downtown Columbus, right? So we're whisked away from the ODP, from where people could see us, and we're sent to a conference room, and sitting across from us is a guy named Connor Meeks, who is a registered Republican, who lives in Kentucky, and union busts as a career. And I don't know. I frankly, I don't know what the ODP thought. I don't know if David Pepper, who is the chairman, realized what the optics were, or maybe he just didn't understand what a big problem it would be. I think that really what it is, though, is, they thought that we wanted to be sort of a union and kind of name only, right? But we're not about that, right? We're going to fight really hard for the contract that we deserve. And so, they can't just hide us up there and sit across from us at the table and not put good things in front of us and expect for us not to take it back to our membership and to take it back to our volunteers and the people who love and care for us about it. So I really think that maybe they thought that this is something that was going to pass really quickly, and I think that they underestimated our fight for what we want.
Yeah, I mean,
and what we deserve.
No, and look, I mean, at the end of the day, what it is that you're compensated with is a form of respect and a form of dignity. And sadly, what's happened, especially in these kind of scenarios where you have campaigns, and I've worked on them in the past, they're more of a dictatorship than they are a democracy. And what you're asking for is democracy.
Yeah. I mean, we're asking for democracy. We're asking for things that not only make it a sustainable career, but really are what we as campaign workers deserve. You can't work 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week and expect us to be fresh 100% of the time and always making good decisions, right? So many of the things that we're asking for, like getting a day off, that's better for the campaign. I'm much better when I've slept more than 5 or 6 hours, right? And it really is, I totally agree. It's a form of dignity. It's making sure that, we have enough money to make ends meet, that we're making a living wage, right? That the Ohio Democratic Party is living up to the Democratic Party standards of $15 an hour, right? Of getting to that minimum wage. And, time and time again, they sit across from us at the table and they put in front of us what they think are great, are great offers, and really they're not, right? And I think that, as somebody who is a member of the Democratic Party, it's really kind of offensive that they would do this, right? That they wouldn't take their workers seriously and they wouldn't want to give us what we frankly deserve.
Do you think it has something to do with the fact that the Democratic Party really hasn't been in tune with organized labor for a very long time? I mean, they pay them lip service, but at the end of the day, I don't know that the Democrats really understand organized labor and really understand unions or really care.
Right. So I do have to say, I mean, one of the things that I love about CWG, but then I'm just going to preface my answer with this, is that I never thought in a million years that I have a degree in Russian studies, that I would find myself so invested in the labor movement. Not at all. And I'm so excited to have found the Campaign Workers Guild, right? Because this is what I see as my chance to really contribute to campaigns and to also make sure that we're getting the younger generation invested back in unions, right? And really seeing the strength and the power that working people have. So going back to your question about Democrats being out of touch with labor, I'm not going to lie, this is really my first experience with the labor movement. But I can say that I've been talking to some people and some volunteers that we have and some people that I know who have worked in the labor union, who have been presidents of their local. And it does really seem that the Democrats are incredibly out of touch with working people. And to me, that's incredibly sad. And I think that this is a prime example of their being out of touch with the workers who are literally under their roofs, right? Yeah. I mean, it's something that I've started to feel like the Democratic Party, by and large, is taking a lot of their base for granted. And I think that labor falls under, really into that category. And I think that in something like this, you can really see the disconnect between the Democrats and the labor movement. And I mean,
the reality is, I've been a labor guy my whole life, and to me, the Democratic Party walked away from labor a very long time ago. You can go president after president. I mean, during the Clinton years, he ran on he's going to pass strike replacement, and they gave it a little bit of lip service, but they didn't really put the full 100% push behind it. You can go back to the Carter years. There was talk of repealing Taft-Hartley and moving all this right to work nonsense gone, but they paid lip service, did nothing. Obama talked about passing the Employee Free Choice Act. They didn't even pay any lip service to that. So to me, Democrats have always said, yeah, we're going to be there with you. And then, well, when the street fight happens, offers the whole workers' coats, which is why I'm glad to see that you guys are standing up and fighting for this, because at the end of the day, it is about dignity, it is about respect, and as I said a minute ago, being able to support your family, that idea of economic justice and inequality and all of those things that Democrats talk about. You shouldn't be exploiting your own campaign staff. It just seems kind of hypocritical to me, just a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I totally agree with that. I think that the reality is that by and large, and there are tons of articles online about this. Most recently, there was one in the Huffington Post about why there is not a lot of diversity among campaign staff, right? And the idea is essentially that people in campaigns are either subsidized, right? So they have some form of income if it comes from their parents, or they're struggling, right? They can't make ends meet, and that is not, I don't think that's something that's a good place for the Democratic Party to be. You should stand up for your workers, and you should stand up for your workers that elect your candidates.
Yeah.
And at this point, when we really are at this juncture where, we're finding that people are either struggling or subsidized, and we're sitting at a table and we're telling them this, and they still come back with proposals that to us, are just completely unacceptable. You realize how, frankly, out of touch they are with their campaign staff and with the workers.
I mean, at the end of it, I was reading some of the your demands, which I don't think are outrageous. Like a $4,000 a month wage, I don't think is completely outrageous for a campaign.
Definitely not.
No, I mean, especially when you're talking about working 60, 70, hours a week. I don't think, being reimbursed for the mileage that you put on your car is unreasonable, considering you can put, 10, 12,000 miles a month on your car, crisscrossing the state. I know, I talked to a friend who's running for lieutenant governor here in Pennsylvania. He's like, I put on 60,000 miles on my car just in the last couple of months, crisscrossing the state. Now, obviously, he's not going to I'm sure he's being reimbursed from his campaign, but maybe his campaign staff isn't.
Yeah. And that's a great question to ask. I mean, people don't realize how much campaign staff put in. We literally sacrifice our bodies. We sacrifice our cars. We sacrifice our relationship for the candidates that we believe in, right? And I think that it's a great thing to question, like, are you making sure that the person who's committing all of these sacrifices is getting what they need to do their work, right? We shouldn't have to pay for, office supplies, and we shouldn't have to, pay to do our jobs, right? We shouldn't have to worry about whether or not if we, put in an expense request, if it's going to, go through, right? And I think that a lot of what we're fighting for are things that maybe in some places and some workplaces are considered really basic, but the fact of the matter is that, I can't be sure if my office is always going to have the office supplies that we've needed. And this is my second paid cycle, and it's been an issue, right? The amount of money that I put in to do my work is really, quite frankly, it's shocking and unacceptable. And so in places where people just assume, right, that like you're going to show up and you're going to have this in an office, right, and you're going to get mileage reimbursement, that those things don't exist for us. And that's what CWG is working towards. And I think that it's a movement that's going to have a huge benefit for the campaign industry and for campaign workers.
No, let's hope so. How many campaigns in Ohio are signed on to this? I know there were a number of campaigns early on. Randy Bryce out in Wisconsin was one of the early ones that unionized his campaign. In Ohio, how many of the state house, how many of the congressional races, how many folks are signed on with you guys?
So currently, it's a little bit difficult, right? Because the ODP is kind of like a sort of a payment clearinghouse, right? So like, I work for the Ohio Coordinated Campaign, right? At the top of that ticket is Sherrod Brown, and Rich Cordray, who's running for governor. Right. And we are the field team. We're the people who are reaching out to voters, calling volunteers. So we're the field team for the Democratic ticket. And so we really work for everyone, right? There are some paid campaign staff that are paid through like the House Caucus, and those people are not in our unit. So our unit is just this core group of coordinated staff.
Okay.
And what's so powerful about that is that we were the first coordinated campaign, statewide coordinated campaign to be recognized. And that you know, I think that's really great. I mean, that's a huge thing for campaigns moving forward, but it also means that we got to make sure and we get the contract we deserve, to be quite frank with you.
So how can we, last question, how can we help?
How can you help? I mean, we just need to make sure that that people know what's going on in Ohio.
So shame.
Shame. I think that, you know, if you all are able to reach out to our party leadership, it's you know, we need to show that there's solidarity with us, right? Even though we're a newer union, right? That we have solidarity and that we have support in labor. I think that, you know, workers are really powerful when they band together. That's something that I very much so believe in. And so reach out, let people know what's going on. We have an FAQ on the Campaign Workers Guild website, and I can make sure and get that to you. I can probably tweet it at you if that works.
That'd be great.
But I would just really love, you know, get that FAQ. We're going to be putting out, you know, probably we've done some social media like zaps, we've done some phone zaps, but just make sure that, you know, you continue to do what you do, and we really appreciate the support of labor in this, and so excited to see this, to see where this goes moving forward. But yeah, I will send you our FAQ. And at this point, I think it's just really important to make sure that folks know what's going on in Ohio and that this doesn't get buried or warped by a press release from the ODP, which, as you know, these things are sort of wont to do. Yeah. So we got to make sure that we tell our truth and that we get it out there and that we're standing up for everything we believe in.
Good stuff.
And we would love for you to stand in solidarity with us.
Absolutely. Good stuff, Sarah. I appreciate it. I hope you'll come back and tell us what's going on. Keep us up to date on how things are progressing. And yeah. Look, shame them where they deserve it and give them credit where they deserve as well.
Yes, and we will do that 100%.
Good stuff. Sarah, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, sir. Bye.
Sarah Willenbrink, member of the Campaign Workers Guild, also a regional director for the Democratic Party there in Ohio. And like I said, shame on them. They should know better. You know, I say that about all Democrats. They should know better, which is why I'm harder on them than I am on the Republicans. Quick break. Right back.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. That was the day that Union Square in New York City was named a National Historic Landmark. Republican Governor George Pataki explained the importance of the park in a press release. It is only fitting that the National Park Service should recognize Union Square Park's long history as a focal point for political expression. New York is proud that the first Labor Day parade took place here in Union Square Park more than 100 years ago, establishing a tradition that spread across the nation. Although the park was very important to the labor movement, that was not why it was known as Union Square. The park got its name because it was the place of intersection or union of two busy New York roads, what are today Broadway and 4th Avenue. In 1831, the open space at the intersection was declared a public space. The space became an important location for labor rallies and political demonstrations. In 1882, the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history marched through the square, 10,000 workers waving their banners high. In 1911, Union workers again gathered at Union Square to protest after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire killed 146 mostly young women and girls, some garment workers as young as 11 and 14 years old. In the later 1920s, the park was demolished for construction of the New York subway, but the space continued to be important to the city's union movement. In 2002, a series of 22 bronze plaques were dedicated at the park to tell the history of Union Square. One of those plaques tells of the first Labor Day parade. Another is a collage of images of labor demonstrations and sheet music of labor songs.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From the cities to the farmlands and trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The unit forever
defended. For 8 years, I was beating up on Obama for not moving forward on labor law reform, and look where we are now, in a position where there's actually talk of the labor movement as we know it ceasing to exist, almost ending back in the days where it was illegal. I mean, in the private sector right now, we're almost to the density rate of where it was when unions were illegal, where people used to meet under railroad trestle bridges at midnight, and making their children swear not to tell mom because they could be ostracized and blacklisted. This is how things have happened in this country. And it's because, and look, you think about all of the resource that labor has put into getting politicians to be, friendly to workers. And the money that the Koch brothers and the wealth class has spent on buying a Republican Party, there's something wrong. And, I go back to the Carter years where there was actually talk of doing away with Taft-Hartley and bringing back the kind of rights that my grandparents had to join and form unions, to where you signed a card and you began bargaining. And if the bargaining didn't happen, you had the right to strike, and there was no replacement. Things stopped. And, we need to be going back to those kind of policies. And then, like I said, Clinton came in, said he ran on striker replacement. Because what's the point of having the right to strike and saying that you can't be fired for going on strike when you can be permanently replaced? This is the thing that's always been mind-blowing to me. Okay, I'm technically not fired, but there's someone doing my job permanently. What is that? It's like when someone lays you off. I was laid off from a job not too long ago. I was fired, in essence, but they called it a layoff. Oh, well, it's just a layoff. No, it's not a layoff. You're firing me. I'm not coming back. I don't have a job. And this is the job that I had, and now it's not mine anymore. That's firing. And, to me, it comes back to this, this argument of, do you have a right to a job? Do you have a right to work? Do you have that right? And the answer is no, absolutely not. And what the poison that the Republicans push in the right to work frame is, well, poverty, wages, desperation, and at-will status. I mean, that's pretty simple. It just is what it is. So I wish that the Campaign Workers Guild the best there in Ohio. At the end of it, the hope is that begins to spread, and not just along Democratic lines, but also on Republican lines. Because, the same 70, 80, 100-hour weeks that Democrats are putting in, Republicans are doing too. And, they're being paid, the same kind of crummy wages. The difference is that the Republicans have a massive infrastructure of places to put people once they've done their quote unquote, they've done their penance, or they've paid their dues, or however you want to frame that. They have a massive, network of think tanks and grassroots AstroTurf groups and all of that stuff. Democrats haven't built that yet. Maybe someday. Maybe it's coming. I wouldn't hold my breath on it. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal reported that nearly 600 Russian-linked troll accounts on Twitter posted conservative anti-Obamacare messages. They're on the Twitters between 2014 and this past May. According to research by Clemson University, they pointed out that the Internet Research Agency, or simply the Russian troll farm, tweeted nearly 10,000 messages about the healthcare policy and the Obamacare. 80% of those tweets had conservative-leaning political messages, often disparaging to the healthcare law. Gee, you think? And you go, why would they do that? Why would they go after poor Obamacare? According to the report, anti-Obamacare tweets intensified in the spring of 2017. Gee, I wonder why. And again that summer, as congressional Republicans were ramping up their ultimately failed repeal. And you go, well, why would they be doing it? Why do the Russian troll farms, why do they care about healthcare or Obamacare? Well, it's simple. The cons have made it a central issue. It's a main issue of division. It's a way of getting their minions, socialism bad, it's socialism, damn it. And, the Democrats see this as an opportunity to, maybe now push back. And I remember back in 2010, saying, look, Democrats, you passed it, run on it, stand with it, be proud of it, do something with it. And now we find out that, Democrats are finally coming around to that, 8 years later. They've launched a major initiative, a major digital ad campaign, I guess $21 million in a number of states across the country doing just that. Because now Democrats have figured out that, hey, maybe healthcare is a winner because, we're finally hearing all these stories, of, people who, thanks to the ACA, and look, it's not perfect. There's a lot that needs to be done, but they're still alive. They got the care, they got the treatment that they needed. The other part of this is you have this lawsuit, Texas versus the U.S., that 20 attorney generals across the country, Republican attorney generals, have signed on to that would repeal the entire ACA. And again, the Trump administration wants to, overturn and destroy all of those provisions that protect people from discrimination by these big insurance companies. Be it, health, be it your pre-existing conditions, be it, gender, be it age, whatever. You can go down the list of all of the things that they could deny you care for. And the thing that's frustrating to me is you've got now a guy who could be put into a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court who would be all in favor of that. And that's really very troubling to me because now you have the fifth vote. Even if Roberts stays, you still have, you've now got Gorsuch, you've now got Kavanaugh. I'm concerned. And I think that's the best way to put it. We also now see that and this is one of those things that's just, there's just something wrong with a government agency that pulls this. But the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, evidently they have massively cut funding for enrollment assistance. Because there are a lot of people who, look, when I signed up for it, it was a long, arduous process. This idea was just a website. No, there were a lot of questions that I had. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So there were people that you could call and say, hey, how do I do this? How do I make sure this is right? Evidently, we're cutting that in massive amounts. And in West Virginia, they cut 83% of the ACA enrollment assistance. 83%. And you can go through a number of these other states that are just being slashed and burned. And the point is look, they want to destroy it. And this year, the first time since the law became law, we've now gone the opposite direction. Every year, things were getting better. Every year, more people were being covered. Every year, we had less uninsured. This year, we've turned the corner and we're going backwards. And understand the Republicans and I hate to say that it's only the Republicans, but it is. I mean, we have the votes. They have made this their battle cry. They have made this the hill that they die on, and hopefully this November they die on that hill. Hopefully, when you go to the polls, you slaughter these SOBs. You remember back in 2010, the Democrats took a major beating to make sure that people got health care. In fact, 63 House seats were flipped. 63 House seats. It would be great to see those 63 House seats flipped back. It's that simple. Now, good news out of Nebraska. This is going to be another one of those interesting things that to pay attention to come election night in November. The Nebraska Supreme Court, they evidently have cleared the way, the last obstacle for voters to have a say on Medicaid expansion. It's going to be on the ballot. Evidently, the state high court ruled against a lawsuit filed by former state senator Mark Christensen and this Lydia Brash. Because they didn't want it on the ballot. Don't want the people to have a say. No. Because you know what? The folks who don't have health insurance, they might want it, and they might want it to be be decent. Just kind of a thought. Now the weird thing is Arkansas has gone the other direction. They've scrapped Medicaid coverage for thousands of people across their states. I mean, it's just this weird kind of, and this is why you need a federal government to step in, because you have these ideological, insane governors who would literally allow their constituents to die because they don't have access to care. And I don't want to sound, you're being extreme. No, taking coverage from people, that's what this means. It is that simple in my view. That simple. Now, some good news. I don't know if you saw the new Apple rollouts. I hate Apple, to be honest, but this actually sounds like an interesting little bit. The Apple Watch, evidently, according to Axios, Apple this morning got the FDA's approval to come forward with its 4th generation watch. It's half smartwatch where you can tell the time and all that stuff, and half medical device. Evidently, it tracks your vital signs. It does like a 30-second EKG, which can tell you if you're going to have your regular heartbeats or stuff like that. There's all kinds of stuff. Evidently, this watch now can do. So if you don't have health insurance, maybe you can just get a watch. So you'll know if you're going to die. Also, I saw the story that AI, artificial intelligence, can now detect whether you're depressed just by the sound of your voice. So maybe people were saying that factory workers are going to be done, and all these low wage jobs, all the the fast food workers are going to be done, and all that. You know what? Doctors, lawyers, you could be gone very soon too. Interesting times. I'll take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
When the kids are united, they can never be defined as yesterday. There's a brand new sheriff today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker delivered his State of the European Union speech on Wednesday, a rough equivalent of America's yearly State of the Union. Juncker tackled some of the EU's foremost challenges, telling the United Kingdom that by voting to leave the EU, the country would have to forego some of Europe's top economic benefits.
Someone who leaves the Union cannot be in the same privileged position as a member state. If you leave the Union, you are, of course, no longer part of our single market, and certainly not only in parts of it.
Juncker also drew a line in the sand over democratic backsliding in Hungary, even backing plans to sanction member states if they fail to uphold the rule of law. And of course, the EU is a complex bureaucracy with multiple power centers, meaning Juncker hardly calls all of the shots. But even so, Zofia Rosak, a researcher in the Institutions Unit of the Center for European Policy Studies, says it's a good thing Juncker tries to articulate a broad European Union agenda.
He's not the president of the EU. There is no such post. But for, let's say, the ordinary citizen, it is quite difficult to understand the very sophisticated and complicated institutional architecture of the EU. So I think it is very helpful if there's one figure who takes up that opportunity of that speech to speak with a united EU tongue a little bit.
With just 8 months left on the job, it's unlikely Juncker will spearhead many new policies. Instead, Rosak said his words aim to describe the EU's value in a changing world, where challenges increasingly require cooperative solutions.
To break it down very simply, I think it's just that, we live in a world of insecurity and uncertainty, and the allies that stood up for us in the past are not as reliable as they used to be. And also we have new challenges with, massive migration and so on. So we have to defend our borders internally and externally, and we have to organize ourselves. Nobody else is doing that for us anymore.
Luke Farkas, the United Nations.
So the Washington Post did a fact check on Donald Trump's speech, his little rally there in Montana on September 9th. And look, they compared, I guess he had done one a couple of months ago, back in July. He had done a rally in Montana, and they found that he's actually getting better. He's actually telling the truth at a higher rate. Now, it's not a lot better, but it's still better. I mean, they're saying that in July, he about 76% of his 98 statements were false, misleading, or unsupported by any facts or reality. But the September 9th one, out of 88 statements, just 68% of them were false. So I mean, that's better, right? 76%, 68. He's getting a little better. Average around 72. I do find it interesting that, some of the things he lied about are things that were easily verifiable. But okay. They say on September 9th, he had 36 completely false statements, 22 misleading statements, and 2 unsupported claims. They did track 28 things that were accurate or mostly accurate, around the fringes. Some of my favorites were on the economy. We have the best economy in history, which, just on its face is, kind of ridiculous to say, because we know during the Clinton years, things were actually a lot better. And as the Post points out, during the Eisenhower years, things were much, much better, even with their 92% top marginal tax rate. And during the Lyndon B. Johnson years, with their 70% top marginal tax rate, things were much better. And even they say the economy was better under Ulysses S. Grant, as corrupt as he was. They point out that Trump said unemployment is at historic lows, and yes, it is low, but it is not as low as it was in 1968-69, which is 3.4%. 2000, it was 3.8%. But you go back to 1953, those socialist days of Dwight David Eisenhower, down to 2.5%. And again, you go, top marginal tax rate, 92%. During the socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower. And the economy worked. And there were still some rich people. I know. He says that more Americans are working today than ever before. Which is, kind of misleading. Because there are more Americans. This is true. There are more of us because the population has grown, obviously. But as a percentage, not so much. In fact, workforce participation is down. And we know that. He also said during the rally that there are more coal miners back to work. That's false. Evidently, according to the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 51,110 coal miners were employed, a gain of 2,400 under Trump. But that's still fewer than the year before his inauguration, which was 89,700. But, hey, facts be damned. He also said that we've actually started the wall, which I didn't know. I didn't know we started the wall. And he said that everybody wants a wall. I don't. So that is false as well. In fact, a Gallup survey in June found that 57% of the people in the country, they don't want a wall either. And, all of this is all fine, well, and good. I think the most interesting moment of the Montana rally was the kid who was just like, what? I think he is now one of the most popular memes on the internet because he's like, what is he talking about? And I got to wonder who vetted him, who allowed him to stand behind Trump. And that process is going to get much more attention going forward. We will have no more plaid wearing shirts and no more people asking questions. And I think muzzles will probably be next. What they'll have is they'll just have permanent smile stickers. So they can just tape your mouth with a permanent smile. You think it's ridiculous? Well, just wait. Anyway, if you missed any of this program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. And take a quick break. Right back with Hour 2. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
How much are you paying Amazon? I don't mean how much you're shelling out for stuff you bought, but how much you and your neighbors are simply giving to this huge and uber-rich online retailer. If you live in Indianapolis, Austin, Chicago, Atlanta, or 16 other lucky cities, congratulations, for you're a finalist in the Throw Your Money at Amazon sweepstakes. It's like Bonnie and Clyde, but instead of robbing banks, Amazon has enticed city and state officials to rob their own citizens, then hand over the loot in the form of tax breaks, land, and other bribes to Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon. The locality that offers the most booty wins the grand prize of having this thieving corporate behemoth become its new neighbor, at least until Bezos gets a better offer. So again, I ask, how much are your officials offering? Shh, that's a secret. Nearly all of the 20 contestant cities won't tell city council members, much less taxpayers, how many billions they're throwing at Bezos. Many cities even turn their negotiations over to business groups like the Chamber of Commerce, letting this handful of unelected, self-interested private elites secretly make binding promises that would affect all residents without consulting them. In the few places that did release information, it's amounted to an unfunny joke. Montgomery County, Maryland, for example, made public a 10-page document listing, quote, incentives it was offering, but every word on every page was blacked out. This is Jim Hightower saying, this whole flim-flam is abominable. Amazon will rake in $250 billion in sales this year, and Bezos is sitting on $166 billion in personal wealth. Shame on him for demanding public handouts, and shame on local officials for robbing the public till to further bloat his ego and fortune.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Class majority. Rick Smith.
So tomorrow, the big primary in New York, and one of the things that caught my attention this week about the governor's races, I saw, the glaring headline was something about Cynthia Nixon eating a cinnamon raisin bagel with lox on it, and I'm going, this is why people should never run for office. Everybody criticizing. If you were to put a bagel in front of me and had lox on it, you'd probably have to put a gun to my head before I would eat it. Or even look at it. Cinnamon raisin bagel, okay, I don't even know what the hell lox are, let alone have to decide whether I'm going to eat it or not. And that's the story. How about what you're going to do for healthcare? How about what you're going to do for infrastructure? How about how we're going to move the state forward? How about some of that? Just absolutely nuts. And here to share some thoughts on, the big primary tomorrow and maybe where the state goes. I've asked our good friend Helaine Olen to come talk with us. She has some fantastic writing over at the Washington Post's blog. Helaine, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me on. And I just have to say, I do not understand Cynthia Nixon's bagel choices at all. As a New Yorker, I am horrified. We first have a mayor who eats pizza with a fork and knife, and now this. Progressives have got to get it together better. I'm sorry.
Oh, pshaw. I mean, look, who cares? This is another reason. Have you ever seen, this is why I could never run for president. I remember, as much as I was never a huge fan of Michelle Bachmann, I remember her going to Iowa and then, shoving this huge corn dog in her face, or, giving people fried butter on a stick or something stupid. I'm going, why is that an issue?
To be fair, I mean, New Yorkers like to have fun with this stuff, right? I don't think anybody took it very seriously.
I know,
but it was horrifying. And on the Jewish holiday, too. Oh, it was horrible. It's revolting to think about.
So let's talk about the big race, because, I've got some friends who are huge Cynthia Nixon fans. In fact, my daughter and I were in Albany back during the women's basketball tournament. And we actually ran into her at the hotel we were staying at, and she was very gracious, took a picture with my daughter and talked with us for a couple of minutes about her campaign. And, I like her. I couldn't do any worse, right? At least that's my thought. Curious yours as a New Yorker.
I really like her too, but the issue is, this is a bad combination. Cuomo's, definitively does not deserve a third term. I think almost everybody sort of agrees that 2 terms has been enough. Unfortunately, he's a power broker, and he basically intimidated anybody who was qualified from running against him in the Democratic primary. And so we got Cynthia Nixon, who is, a wonderful person and a wonderful actress, but probably really isn't qualified for the job. And so it leaves people with this sort of not great choice of voting for somebody that they're not particularly enthusiastic about, to put it mildly, or, somebody most everybody kind of agrees is probably not up for the job. And I mostly put the blame for this, not on Nixon for running, but on Cuomo for putting everybody in this position. I mean, on one level, you shouldn't be so afraid of the competition. It doesn't speak well of you. And it certainly doesn't speak well of any run for president in 2020.
Do you find it interesting that the Sanders people didn't endorse her?
Well, I understand. I mean, the polling in these primaries tends to be a bit erratic because there's such low turnout events, right? I mean, this one especially on Thursday. But on the other hand, I kind of get it. I mean, he just doesn't really have a chance of winning. And I get why they're going to not, take a position on this one. I really do get it. I mean, they're politicians. He's a politician. He's got to act like a politician sometimes.
Good point. And the Thursday thing, what's with that? When did that start? Or has it always been that way?
New York is strange. Basically, I think it was moved because of Russia shut up, but I'm not an expert on this part of it. But essentially, New York is a state where they frantically attempt to drive down the turnout in primaries. This is notorious and longstanding. You can't change your party registration. I think it's 9 or 10 months in advance. I forget the exact prism there. And this is, a sort of notorious part of living in New York. One of the reasons the Joe Crowley thing happened, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won, was that they drove up the turnout by a couple of percentage points. It was still under 20%. Crowley had a specialty, basically, in the way he won this district, which was majority minority for a long time, was that there was barely any turnout. So nobody was really paying much attention.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to showing up and casting the ballot. But, I look at this. So given the fact that there is this kind of low turnout, wouldn't this be kind of the perfect time for the Bernie people to go, hey, look, maybe if we did what Ocasio did and we drive up the turnout, just a little bit, maybe you could oust Cuomo, who, was it the New York Times said that he's got potential? I mean, he's a 2-term governor. Shouldn't the potential have been, I don't know, before the first term?
I think it was Sarah Jaffe who said she wants to come back as a white, middle-aged white man next time, have potential in her 60s. I know Sarah's on your show, so I don't have to reference who she is, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Kindergartners have potential, right? He's a 2-term governor. He's done some great stuff. He got through, $15 an hour minimum wage increase. He got through gay marriage. I'm going to hand it to him for that. On the other hand, the subways in New York City, which literally are the engine of our economy in New York City, are in a state of absolute collapse. And, the feud de Blasio, our mayor, is ridiculous. It doesn't speak well of either of them. And you've got to question what's really going on here. This point, it's not a great situation. All that being said, I think the polling shows such a wide discrepancy. I'd be shocked if Cuomo lost. I have a question about the polling, which is not that extensive, really, is in some of the other races, like lieutenant governor, like attorney general, where, the last time we had a competitive attorney general race, for instance, polling that was released roughly the same time before the election as now showed that Eric Schneiderman, who infamously won that election, was in 3rd place, like Zephyr Teachout is now. Because most people don't even know what is attorney general? Who's running? I mean, even among the people who are going to turn out, it's just not a high awareness factor.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I've just been watching it from kind of a distance. I liked Schneiderman. He got himself all caught up with being, kind of an a-hole, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
It actually really, really well. I was joking that, if Cuomo and Teachout win, it's going to be kind of like a Yiddish curse. May you get elected to a third term as governor, and Zephyr Teachout will be your attorney general, because she is going to investigate the living daylights out of him if that's what happens. For the listeners who don't know, who are not from New York, Cuomo, one of his chief aides was recently convicted of corruption. And a few months ago, both former head of our state Senate, a guy named Dean Skelos, and the former head of our state assembly, a guy named Sheldon Silver, have also both been convicted of corruption. Albany is a pretty corrupt place. So it'll be interesting to see what the next attorney general, whomever this person may be, is going to make of it.
Yeah, well, as is Harrisburg, as is, go name the state capital across this country, and you can say that they're all corrupt. I mean, Pennsylvania is famous for having a corrupt government.
That's true, but New Yorkers always like to think they're special.
Yes, they do. But back to the subway. I mean, is it possible to even fix that? I mean, I go into New York quite often, and it's one of these scenarios where you shut down one lane or you shut down one thing, and it's just gridlock, and it's a nightmare to get anything fixed. Is it even possible?
It was in the 1980s. I mean, the service used to be much, much worse. And I mean, I will say, for all the complaining about the subway, it's still much better than it was in the 1970s and 1980s. So I was here, I know, but absolutely perfectly capable of doing this. They can close lines at night. They can close them on the weekends. In fact, they've been doing that quite extensively. The issue is not just the closing of the lines. It's that we need signal upgrades. We need maintenance. We need there needs to be paid attention to how many people are on the trains. There aren't as many as the past couple of years, but it's still borderline record-breaking stuff. I mean, much more people than were on it, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is just something that is not being dealt with in any way, shape, or form. And part of the fault goes to Cuomo, who has not been funding it properly. Part of the fault goes to de Blasio, who then holds money back. Part of the fault is both of theirs, because neither of them famously use the subway very often. Cuomo has, as far as I know, except for the occasional press op, has never been on it at all during his time as governor. In fact, word's out, I'm forgetting who published the story this week, that he won't go near it because he knows he'll get heckled on the platforms if he tries. So, as people, as you know, if you go on Twitter, you can see are very angry about the situation with our subways at this point.
And he's probably right. He probably should stay off the subway, because he probably would get heckled, or even worse. Now, I wanted to change gears a little bit, because you had written a piece this week about the cowards of the country. And I don't know if you saw Ben Sass, the senator from Nebraska, came out and he said that every day he thinks about leaving the GOP. Every day he thinks about it, Helaine. Every single day he wakes up, he thinks about leaving. And I'm going, you know what? BS. Nonsense. The reality is, this is a guy who is fully in lockstep with Trump's policies. He just doesn't like him because he's rude and obnoxious and Trump. But they're on board with the policies. They want to make this country and the vulnerable in this country much worse off. They want to make working people's lives brutish and short. So don't give me any of that nonsense that they care about the country. Nonsense.
Well, I mean, these people talk about responsibility for other people, right? Medicaid people need to be responsible and work, right? Or Democrats are a pile of wimps, right? Remember all that. And yet, when push comes to shove, they're the ones who can't stand up to Trump, supposedly. I mean, all this dithering, it's Ben Sass, it's Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, Susan Collins. They all do it, and then they basically vote lockstep or close to lockstep with Trump. And the reason is he's giving them what they want, which is the tax cuts on the wealthy, the rollback of regulations, the making of workers' lives much harder, and basically money, money, money. I mean, that's mostly the motivation here. And, it's disturbing. And it's disturbing that anybody is actually falling for it at this point. It seems pretty obvious that this is so much blather. I mean, it's it's sort of performance dithering almost.
No, I mean, I was just watching CNN the other day, and they had Ryan Costello, who's another right-wing idiot, who's saying, "Oh, we need to become much more independent Republicans," which is saying, you know what, we're going to distance ourselves from the bad Trump, but we're going to take credit for all of the horrible policies that they're ramming through that are going to make people's lives worse off. We're going to take credit for Kavanaugh, but not for Trump. It just infuriates me, and I'm hoping that people are waking up and looking at these Republicans and going, "You're all cowards."
Well, the polls are starting to show. I mean, that the odds are great. They're not going to do so great in November at this point. I mean, they're in a kind of a voting box in a way, which is that the people who vote in the Republican primaries are still primarily Trump. So they are afraid if they come forward that they will then not, get the nod in their primary and then therefore not be elected, right? But on the other hand, if we make it through their primaries, Trump supporters, they're starting to look at, given the trend lines, that they won't then make it through to the election. The point is when everybody says this, though, it's like, oh, so of course they're doing this. And it's like, well, we elect people to do what's right, not just to get reelected.
Yeah, I'm just amazed at the idiocy that we see coming out of this. Before I let you go, your thoughts? Any thoughts on Kavanaugh? Any thoughts on the hearings that just wrapped up?
It's an absolute disgrace. He's clearly lying at several points. Count me as one who thinks his finances are still a little mysterious and should be given a little bit more attention. He's clearly going to back in many ways on abortion rights, on worker rights, on union rights, fill in the blank, right? And this is just kind of sailing through, and it's sort of horrifying.
Were you surprised that the Democrats, for just a little bit of time, had a little bit of spine and kind of went after him, or are you in the camp where they shouldn't even bothered playing and should have just taken their ball and gone home?
Oh, no, I think they, did. I don't want to say they did the best they could, but they fought back. If it had been me personally, I would have made the guy, read some of the questions he asked Monica Lewinsky to just, show what sort of guy had been nominated to the Supreme Court here. And I think that might have brought home to more people at home exactly how disturbing this appointment is. For those listeners who don't know, Kavanaugh was very involved with the Monica Lewinsky Ken Starr investigation, and apparently came up with a lot of the questions that, to describe them as prurient, is to put it politely, that were asked of Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah, and for me, I mean that's a horrible part there, but for me, it's the the SeaWorld case. I mean the fact that he, like Gorsuch, willing and perfectly okay with workers dying on the job, and us not having regulatory ability to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, it's just mind blowing to me.
But that actually came up. I mean, and I think I just feel that having made him, read some of the questions he came up with might have sort of brought this home to voters in a way that these things can sometimes be very dry.
No, I'm hoping there's still a way to go after Susan Collins, even though. Was it yesterday she came out and said that evidently there's a GoFundMe account to try and give her money to vote against Kavanaugh, and she said it's like a bribe. They're trying to bribe me, like all of your corporate donors haven't been bribing you for all the years of your political career.
Right. No, I mean, I have lots of thoughts on what goes on with Susan Collins, who basically runs a scam, as far as I'm concerned, where she seems very, concerned and torn, and then somehow almost most of the time votes not her conscience, right? Or what she claims is her conscience. And
or what she claims.
Act, frankly. And I suspect strongly a male politician wouldn't get away with it to quite the same extent.
Well, I mean, she's walking in lockstep with the party. Of course she's going to get away with it. Had she actually come out against it, then maybe a whole different story. But hey, thanks, Maine, for giving us, Susan Collins.
Exactly.
Sad stuff. Helaine, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work.
Oh, thank you.
As always, great to talk to our good friend Helaine Olen. Again, you want to check out her work over at the Washington Post's blog. Fantastic stuff. We'll get links out to make sure that you can do that. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people come to talk.
Our weapon solidarity Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood.
As always, great to talk to our good friend Helaine Olen. Again, you want to check out her work over at the Washington Post's blog. Fantastic stuff. We'll get links out to make sure that you can do that. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the talk.
A weapon solidarity. Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood. The list goes on and on. With every year that passes, 60,000 more gone. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. And it's time we started calling the shots.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day the United Rubber Workers Union was founded in Akron, Ohio. Akron was the rubber capital of the world. All the major companies were there: Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, and General Tire. In Akron alone, there were more than 40,000 rubber workers and thousands more throughout the country. After 30 years of struggling to build the union, hopes of organizing the industry were finally made real. The founding of the International came after a successful strike the year before. But the union was born amid growing tensions within the AFL. These were the years of industrial organizing that rivaled the exclusive skilled craft unions. Growing demands to organize the mass industries would explode the next month at the historic AFL convention in Atlantic City. The tensions between AFL leaders and rubber workers delegates gave a taste of things to come. At the founding convention, rubber workers delegates opposed a number of AFL leaders' demands. The AFL insisted on appointing officers. They threatened to withdraw financial assistance when the delegates demanded democratic elections. But AFL leaders backed off when unionists from across the city protested. Then, delegates voted down an AFL constitutional clause proposal to bar communists from the union. They also refused AFL orders to organize on anything less than a total industry basis. Organizing skilled workers into the United Rubber Workers became a contentious issue at the October AFL convention. It led to the fistfight between Carpenters leader Bill Hutchison and Mine Workers president John Lewis, which precipitated the AFL split. By the following spring, the new United Rubber Workers Union would lead another successful strike that put it firmly among the industrial unions of the CIO.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Remember Julie Briskman? Does that name ring a bell? Remember, she was the bicyclist who was, riding in the parkway there as Trump departed the National Golf Club, and she just shared her thoughts. Gave him the one finger salute, and was subsequently fired for her job. She is now running. She's now filed the paperwork to run for the Algonquian District Supervisor's position in Loudoun County, Virginia, in 2019, throwing the name on the ballot. She said she had never thought about, getting involved in politics, never thought of, running for anything. But since her firing and subsequently losing her wrongful termination lawsuit, she's decided to get involved in the political arena and change things. And, a lot of people, and I remember talking about this extensively when it happened, there's no recourse here. She did get some severance. She was probably able to collect unemployment. But at the end of the day, no wrongful termination, because guess what? At will employment is just that. You're at their will. Something you don't like, there's the door. Your recourse, file unemployment. So I'm hoping she does well. Currently, the board there in Loudoun County, Virginia, is a 6-3 Republican majority. It would be nice to see her take out one of the Republicans that she's running for, and good for her. I'm hopeful that more people run for office, especially the ones who have been wronged. I want angry people. And remember, I don't think I talked about this. It was on my list to get to, but I think I actually got to it. The mayor of Kenner, Louisiana, this guy named Ben Zahn. He made a big production about saying, the city recreation department is not going to buy any Nike products because, Nike, sided with that guy. And had a whole big display kind of, whole big, out. Evidently, he, in a very short period of time, because it was just the 5th, he had his little tirade. He has now done a complete about face. Not apologizing, mind you, but doing an about face, rescinding the order based on advice from the city attorney, which now he's saying he hopes there's an opportunity to bring the city back together. So he ripped it apart, wants to bring it back together. And I would have to imagine, his campaign manager said, hey, this was probably a really dumb idea, considering you're in a fairly high minority area. And this is one of those things that might encourage people to register to vote, might actually encourage, people to, I don't know, throw your sorry, bitter little behind out of office. And look, as a politician, probably liking his cushy gig, probably thought, it's a good idea. Maybe I should eat a little crow right now so that I'm not out on my racist behind down the road. So there you have it, an about face, and there you go. And I remember looking at this going, why would you pursue this? This is, just kind of stupid to me. But again, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to have won an election. You just need to have won the popularity contest. Very, very strange. Anyway, going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the top.
I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. Socialist and labor leader Eugene V. Debs was sentenced to 10 years in prison for opposing the United States' involvement in World War I. The Espionage and Sedition Act had been passed a year earlier. This made it a criminal offense to interfere with military recruitment efforts. Debs made a speech at a socialist convention in Canton, Ohio, that was considered a violation of this act. He said, "They have always taught and trained you to believe it is your patriotic duty to go to war and have yourself slaughtered at their command. But in all the history of the world, you, the people, have never had a voice in declaring war." Debs also noted, "The master class has always declared the wars, the subject class has always fought the battles." Debs refused to take the stand in his own defense at his trial. He admitted to obstructing the war effort, saying the war did nothing for working people. Debs ran for president as a socialist in 1920 while in jail. Many of his campaign buttons read, "Convict number 9653. During his run, Debs received 1 million votes. Debs was released from the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in 1921. Many agreed with his assertion that the working class have never been the ones to profit from war. In 1935, two-time Medal of Honor recipient and U.S. Marine Corps Major General Smedley Darlington Butler published a book titled War is a Racket, which outlined the excesses of the corporate class over the workers. Many look at the 2003 Iraq invasion by President Bush as another example. Halliburton, a multinational corporation, made nearly $40 billion from its involvement in that war. It's doubtful that any working class people have ever made that kind of profit from war.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the storm, making landfall, And the thing that gets me is I cannot imagine why you're not gathering the sheep and getting the flock out after all of the reports and everyone saying, there go. It's going to be horrible. And even the president, even Donald Trump saying it's going to be tremendous. It's going to be tremendously wet. There's going to be tremendous amounts of water and tremendous rain. It's going to be tremendous. And I look, equally, the response, I'm assuming, he will say is tremendous as well. Let's find out what is actually going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. I've got Tom Squitieri, Pentagon correspondent for Talk Media News. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome. Great to be here.
So tremendous amounts of water, tremendously wet water. I'm worried, and I can't imagine that anybody with a brain between their ears wouldn't get out.
Well, you know, I always, like you were saying, I'm just always perplexed by folks who choose not to leave in the face of a certain Mother Nature whacking that's about to happen. I get the fact that you don't want to leave your home alone and all that, but this is going to be a bad storm. And I covered Hurricane Hugo in 1989, and that's hit about the same place this one's aiming for. That was a Category 4, if I remember correctly. And that area around Charleston, South Carolina, which is a low marsh area, that hurricane blew water all the way up into there, and so much damage, the president might say. But there was a lot of damage, and people who stayed there were just inconvenienced beyond belief. And they kept saying, I don't know why I stayed there. And I wanted to say, well, why did you?
Exactly. I don't know why. Why do we go through this? I mean, at some point, don't we just say, you know what? This is just not an area we should be building, especially trailer parks.
Yeah, I have a friend who, he and I were roommates in college, and we're still friends today. And he worked for the city of New York Emergency Services, and he said the same thing happens all the time. There was a storm, a Sandy, a couple years ago that brought a lot of water and damage to New York and New England. And he remembers having to go in to get people who refused to leave, and then waters would get so high that the Coast Guard or the other emergency people had to come in and get them. But so the people not only endanger themselves, they endanger those people who have to go in and rescue them.
So is it wrong of me? Because look, I'm a community guy. I believe in helping your neighbor. But is it wrong of me to go, you know what? If you're dumb enough to stay, you're on your own.
No, I think that any individual has to weigh the consequences of staying or trying to rescue somebody. That's why you leave now. This is why when they say leave, you leave. And most people have friends or relatives that they can go to a place. If not, the government's pretty good about providing shelter if you really need to have shelter. FEMA will provide shelter, and others. I think the inconvenience of leaving for a week or whatever the days it would be outweighs the fact that you could be stuck and marooned in your house or home, and no one might even know that. People might not know you're there because your neighbors have gone.
No, I was watching CNN, and they were saying that there could be 9 to 13 feet, just waves of water crashing in, and they actually had a little display of a little house and water rising up above the first floor, and saying, you know what, don't go into your attic because you might get trapped there.
Yep,
and you go,
that's right.
Of course. I mean, this is stuff that I know a lot of people don't think of, but maybe take an axe with you if that's what you're going to do. I don't know why you would stay.
Water is one of the most dangerous parts of nature. Fires you can battle with water. You can battle fires with chemicals and water and other things. It's hard and it's a tough foe, but you can battle fire. It's very difficult to battle water, especially when accompanied in a hurricane force behind it. The surges are just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me. But here's the thing, especially now, and this could be just my being jaded and thinking this administration is incompetent, but especially right now, do you really want to put your life in the hands of this federal government with this badly as they botched what happened in Puerto Rico? I mean, I just, look, we can have a partisan discussion on it, but, I just personally, I look at what this administration did there, and I go, I'm sorry, I'm leaving.
I'm not going to take a position as a partisan. I'm taking a position as a reporter who has watched hurricanes and other disasters since President Clinton was in office. I remember accompanying his FEMA director at the time, James Lee Witt, after a hurricane hit some of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. and the way they responded was well orchestrated, well rehearsed, and successful. So that was a high bar, and the Bush administration had some issues with Katrina, obviously. These are not things that are easy. They're almost like going to war. You can have a good plan, but you never know what's going to happen after the hurricane hits, because it could stay there, it could move in a different direction, etc.
I think the key there. I think the key though is
Puerto Rico is a good. Sorry to interrupt. Puerto Rico is a good example of not being prepared and not doing anything once it hit.
Right. Yeah, but the key is having the plan, and that's
right.
my problem.
That's it. Yeah, I don't know if they have one, and I think that's a fair question to raise.
And especially when you see the report today that came out, Senator Markley points out that almost $10 million was taken from the FEMA budget and moved over to ICE. Whether that's going to affect their budgeting or affect their response, I don't know. I know FEMA has pushed back and said, no, it's not a big deal. It's only 1% of our budget, but still $10 million could buy, a lot of water and a lot of response.
I think the symbolism of that is critical. That they're taking money from an agency that needs money, that's there for this very thing that's about to happen, to doing it and moving it to an agency that does have a political agenda. Not the agency, but it's being used for a political agenda. Let me rephrase that. And I think that's the problem of it, because a little bit there, a little bit here, you start taking money from agencies for political reasons. Now, FEMA's not been gutted by this, but it goes back to what you and I just said. Where's the plan? I cover the Pentagon, as you pointed out, and they have a plan already. They had a plan to put their ships out and get their planes moved inland and this and that to protect their assets. And the troops that can't leave, they have a plan. So, they have a plan. Now, how well it's going to work, you never know until the hurricane hits. But they have a plan.
Yeah, someone had emailed me and said, this could be I don't understand why President Trump doesn't do like Bush did in Florida and other people, at the time, do massive amounts of resources just for the PR of it. And, just because he needs the approval boost. But we'll see. Look, I mean, the guy's great at saying he was the best ever and most tremendous ever and greatest ever. So I'm sure more of that will come. Let's move along. Evidently this week, big appropriations bill, I guess 12 funding bills are being banged around. Any chance of us having the thing we were so accustomed to during the Obama years, which was, that kind of ticking bomb, 24 to the edge of the abyss, looking over into catastrophe kind of shutdown talks?
I don't know if we're going to get to the edge of the abyss, but I do think that there is a small chance that you would have a threat of a shutdown for political reasons. On the flip side, the positive side of it, about 8 or 9 of these bills, there's 12 of them, 8 or 9 of them look to be wrapped into some smaller packages, like 3 or 4 to 1 vote. Those votes may come tomorrow in the Senate, and if they come in the Senate and the House, they could wrap up a bunch of them before September 30th. The thing is, it's not 15 days left. There's only about 3 or 4 days left that Congress expects to be in session. So you really don't have the rest of the month, even though September 30th is the deadline. If they knock off about 7 or 8 of them tomorrow and maybe Friday, I think then the chance for a shutdown is reduced, because the bills that are left will be less controversial and they could wrap it into a CR, continuing resolution, just for those.
Yeah.
The defense bill, for example, is part of one of these votes that they'll do, and that's been incredibly bipartisan in pushing to get it done. They've stripped out a bunch of these so-called poison pill amendments that raise opposition from different people, so they have more people voting against it than for it. And I think that's been the plan for a lot of these bills, to kind of keep these controversial amendments out of them.
Yeah, when do we raise the debt ceiling again? It just popped into my head, because that's usually
that should be coming up pretty soon. Actually, it's usually they usually time it to raise it after the election.
Yeah, I was waiting to see if that was right before Election Day, so we can have that.
Yeah.
Because don't you miss those battles during the Obama years where we weren't sure if the global economy was going to collapse and if we were going to pay our bills or not? Don't you miss those days?
Yeah, those days aren't gone. I mean, it's just a question of timing now. I mean, the United States is so far in debt with other countries, and the interest on payment on the debt is incredibly high. And I just keep wondering when some other countries are going to call in as IOUs.
Yeah, well, we are the reserve currency, and I keep asking the question: where are all the T-Twizzlers who were screaming during the Obama years? that we don't have money to give away like we did during the big tax handout.
One thing it seems that Washington will never run out of is hypocrisy. You know, all the people who criticized President Obama for certain things are silent on it for President Trump, and vice versa. Those who are silent for President Obama are criticizing President Trump. So we always will have that, Rick, to count on if we don't have the debt ceiling.
Death, taxes, and, well, hypocrisy in D.C.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Seems pretty simple. Let's move internationally. Evidently, there's a third phase of Operation Roundup against ISIS in Syria.
I don't know if you saw this story I did a while ago, but I'll answer your question in a moment. I was curious about how they named Operation Roundup when they announced it spring, and the Pentagon officials were quick to say, no, we're not naming it after that pesticide that kills plants, Roundup, although it sounds like a good name. It turned out, after spending months to figure it out, because no one wanted to talk about it, it was named after an elementary school in Montana where when the generals in Central Command, that's the area of the world where U.S. forces call it Central Command over there,
right.
That's where he went to elementary school. So he names it after his elementary school, right? Okay. That really gives you a lot of confidence in what's going to happen. Well, there were 3 phases of it, and they're pushing ISIS out of places in eastern Syria. And this is the last phase, phase 3. It started Monday. It's ground troops to Syrian Democratic Forces. They're the Syrians who are part of the coalition, the anti-ISIS coalition that the United States leads. The United States is providing air support and artillery support, and probably assistance on the ground in the sense of intelligence and stuff like that. But they're not going to go in. U.S. troops are not supposed to be going in and doing street fighting. It's going to be really messy. ISIS is holed up in a little place along the Euphrates River near the border with Iraq. The Iraqis have very well closed the border to make sure no one flees into Iraq. They've got that down pretty well. So it's going to be a pretty messy battle, and it's going to take a while, according to the Pentagon. But that will take care of the last land holdings of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. I think back for a couple of years when they controlled all of eastern Syria and much of western Iraq, and they had that oil and all that. That doesn't mean ISIS is done in either of those 2 countries. In fact, they're still going to be there hiding in the desert and in other places, but they won't have a city or a town or any land mass that they control any longer.
Right. All right. Well, it's at some point, I guess we got to add this to the war list as well. I mean, in all the places that we're. I know about Syria. We're still talking a little bit.
I hasten to add too that this doesn't mean we're out of Syria, because the Pentagon dropping these sort of not so subtle hints that we need to stay for a while to make sure ISIS doesn't come back. And then there's the whole question no one really talks about is the United States and its coalition partners are in eastern Syria, and the Syrian government and the Russians are essentially in western Syria and southern Syria. How's that going to work out?
No, it's one of the questions I was going to ask you, because you've got Assad and Putin who seem to be buddy, and then you've got us on the other side, and you've got Trump and Putin who seem to be buddy. It's just this weird kind of geopolitical.
It really is. Is. Yeah.
We don't actually know. We don't even know what the teams are anymore.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Outside of the fact that we now know that the Chinese and the Russians launched what appears to be the largest war games in history.
It's certainly there's Russians since the end of the Cold War. But before we move east to Mongolia, where that's taking place, I just wanted to also note that we talked a couple minutes ago about hypocrisy in Washington. Another trait that seems to be bipartisan is the abandonment of friends and allies by the United States in these parts of the world, the Middle East. So you have the Syrian Kurds and the others who have been fighting with the United States against ISIS, and as I mentioned, carrying out much of the bloody street fighting work. What's going to happen to them? They don't want to go be under Assad anymore. They're going to want to have an independent nation. That is part of the equation no one talks about as well. So, there's these geopolitical issues that are really out there.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I don't think most Americans know or care.
You're probably right.
I hate to be so blunt about that, but I think you could ask anybody to find Syria on a map, and good luck on that. But do they really care that this kind of fighting is going on, or any of that? I think most people just want to get our troops home and be done with that, and be isolated like we we like to think we can be.
Yep, I agree with you on that. Now, to the Russians and the Chinese, this is the first time Chinese troops have trained with the Russians ever.
Which kind of freaks me out.
Yeah, and here's the interesting, because I'm a nerd on these things. No one in the Chinese army has seen any military fighting since 1979. I recently, I was a reporter on a trip with the defense secretary when he went to China in June and a couple other spots, and there were more reporters traveling with him who had been in war zones and been shot at than in the entire Chinese army. So the Chinese army is military. It's a big army, and they train very well, but they've never experienced combat. The Russians have, of course, in bloody combat in their neighbors where they've invaded. So they have experience. So this will be a very interesting exercise, and there's some Mongolian troops as well, part of it. It bothers me as well. I mean, it's clear that if you have a friendship between China and Russia, General Secretary Mattis has talked about a return to big power engagement, and that clearly is the factor that Russia and China against the United States. Here's one you're going to like, Rick. Speaking of Russia, you may know that at the very, very end of World War II, when Japan was on its heels about to surrender, only then did Russia, the Soviet Union, declare war on Japan. And they promptly invaded some northern islands that were part of Japan, and they still have them today. It's a sore spot between the Japanese and Russians, obviously, more so from Tokyo. Over the weekend, at an economic forum in Vladivostok, Putin suggested to President Abe of Japan that they sign a treaty ending the war, because they've never signed a peace treaty between the two countries. And Abe apparently told him, yeah, give us our islands back first. So, I mean, Putin's really feeling emboldened these days, and probably for good reason.
Yeah, well, give us our islands back. And wouldn't it be nice to have a leader that would stand up to Putin like that?
Well, I basically, he said that, not to his face. I think, that he was just more, he kind of gave him a look, as they say, and then later on, the foreign minister put it in not so diplomatic terms, give us our islands back first, and then we'll talk about a peace treaty.
Jeez. Very dangerous times, and my fear is we've got a guy in the White House who has done everything he can do to isolate our allies at a time when the rest of the world seems to be coalescing around authoritarianism and what we see coming out of China.
Well, to continue that theme, if you wish, for one more moment, the European Union has voted to punish in some way, I don't quite get how, Hungary for its drift away from being a democracy into more of an authoritarian state. They're concerned that the example by Hungary will then convince other nations to follow a non-democratic path back in Eastern Europe. So I'm with you on this. I think the world is sort of in a bad situation right now, and I'm not an alarmist. I'm sort of thinking I'm a realist on this. That you need strong Western leadership, and we don't have a really good, strong Western leadership here in the United States, the UK, other than Angela Merkel in Germany, who's having political problems at home as well. You don't have any Western democracies who seem to be able to pick up the challenge of being a world leader.
Well, 2020 can't come fast enough as far as I'm concerned. But, Tom, I appreciate the thoughts, the input. Thanks so much, man.
You're welcome. Have a one. Bye-bye.
Good stuff. Thanks so much. Tom Squitieri, Pentagon correspondent there at Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. That was the day that Union Square in New York City was named a National Historic Landmark. Republican Governor George Pataki explained the importance of the park in a press release. It is only fitting that the National Park Service should recognize Union Square Park's long history as a focal point for political expression. New York is proud that the first Labor Day parade took place here in Union Square Park. more than 100 years ago, establishing a tradition that spread across the nation. Although the park was very important to the labor movement, that was not why it was known as Union Square. The park got its name because it was the place of intersection or union of two busy New York roads, what are today Broadway and 4th Avenue. In 1831, the open space at the intersection was declared a public space. The space became an important location for labor rallies and political demonstrations. In 1882, the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history marched through the square, 10,000 workers waving their banners high. In 1911, union workers again gathered at Union Square to protest after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire killed 146, mostly young women and girls, some garment workers as young as 11 and 14 years old. In the later 1920s, the park was demolished for construction of the New York subway, but the space continued to be important to the city's union movement. In 2002, a series of 22 bronze plaques were dedicated at the park to tell the history of Union Square. One of those plaques tells of the first Labor Day parade. Another is a collage of images of labor demonstrations and sheet music of labor songs.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker delivered his State of the European Union speech on Wednesday, a rough equivalent of America's yearly State of the Union. Juncker tackled some of the EU's foremost challenges, telling the United Kingdom that by voting to leave the EU, the country would have to forego some of Europe's top economic benefits.
Someone who leaves the Union cannot be in the same privileged position as a member state. If you leave the Union, you are of course no longer part of our single market, and certainly not only in parts of it.
Juncker also drew a line in the sand over democratic backsliding in Hungary, even backing plans to sanction member states if they fail to uphold the rule of law. And of course, the EU is a complex bureaucracy with multiple power centers, meaning Juncker hardly calls all of the shots. But even so, Zofia Rosak, a researcher in the Institutions Unit of the Center for European Policy Studies, says it's a good thing Juncker tries to articulate a broad European Union agenda.
He's not the president of the EU. There is no such post. But for, let's say, the ordinary citizen, it is quite difficult to understand the very sophisticated and complicated institutional architecture of the EU. So I think it is very helpful if there's one figure who takes up that opportunity of that speech to speak with a united EU tongue a little bit.
With just 8 months left on the job, it's unlikely Juncker will spearhead many new policies. Instead, Rosak said his words aim to describe the EU's value in a changing world, where challenges increasingly require cooperative solutions.
To break it down very simply, I think it's just that, we live in a world of insecurity and uncertainty, and the allies that stood up for us in the past are not as reliable as they used to be, and also we have new challenges with, massive migration and so on. So we have to defend our borders internally and externally, and we have to organize ourselves. Nobody else is doing that for us anymore.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists are bound to lose?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, look, are you as freaked out about the whole China-Russia, war games launching today as I am? Because, look, we can have a lot of conversations about what Trump's doing around the world. We can have a lot of conversations if he's a buffoon, if he has any clue of what he's doing, purely just the messaging coming out of this. And I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago with a guy who, was a career military guy who, huge right-winger, but one of the people who said that, and he said it to me, I'm normally the guy who goes, I think, if two guys sit down of opposite ideologies that you could really hammer out, across the kitchen table, you could hammer out agreements. It's not that difficult. It's when you get into these tribes and you get into your camps that, you can't have conversations. And, look, I had some really good conversations with him. He said, look, the fear in his mind, as someone who served in the military for a very long time, is that whether it's true or it's not true. He believes it's not. I believe it is. A lot of people believe that, you know, Trump is incompetent when it comes to military things. And look, at the beginning, and I said this right from the start, by picking Kelly, by picking Mattis, you know, the hope was that they would be moderating forces, that they would be able to kind of, you know, put him on a path to where, you know, these are the parameters, stay within these bounds of crazy, and don't veer into an absolute insanity. That hasn't happened. But his fear is, look, you know, you've got the quote out of the Woodward book that, you know, Trump's got the intelligence of a fifth grader. Do you not think that Putin and the Chinese, do you not think that they're going, you know, now is the time for us to expand. Now is the time for us to think in terms of empire and of, you know, global dominance, and to really put those Americans in their place. If you don't think that's going on, it is. And whether it's real that Trump is, you know, really got the intellect of a fifth grader when it comes to military things, or if it's imagined, it's the messaging that's out there. And then you look across the globe of how he has divided us with our allies, people that, you know, we've stood with since the end of World War II, well, even through World War II. You know, how he has divided them. I have really, really big concerns, because understand, and this isn't hard to understand. Putin wants to get the old gang back. He would love nothing more than to pull the old band back together. You know, pull all those countries back under the umbrella of the Russian Federation. Bring back the old Soviet Union and have, you know, them be the global superpower on level with us. And, you know, the fact that, you know, they're kind of marrying up with the Chinese is concerning. And you have to really wonder, you know, where this leads us. How much danger does this cause us going forward? But, you know, look, nothing good comes of this experiment. And and I've said this before, I fear we're in those, you know, April, May, June, July, August months of September of 2001, where everyone's kind of asleep at the wheel. Hey, things are going okay. Nothing's happened. You know, everyone's, you know, thinking about the economy and going shopping and, you know, whatever. And the guard is down. That's my great fear. Because I don't buy that, you know, Trump's put the best people in these positions. In fact, if you read some of the stories that are out there, Trump doesn't have anybody in a lot of positions. That is scary, scary stuff. And really, really very frustrating to me, because, you know, I do believe in our government being able to respond to things like the hurricane that is bearing down on us. I do believe we need to be that shining city on the hill. We need to be that global leader, that hand of temperance, but not now. And this is why elections matter. This is why the people that you put into these positions matter. I know people have said in the past that, you know, well, it doesn't really matter who's president. You know, the machine will run. You've got good people in these positions, and the machine will run. Well, we're going to see. We're going to see what happens after this hurricane hits the eastern coast of the U.S. We're going to see what FEMA does. Even their own internal study of their response in Puerto Rico said they basically screwed the pooch. Said that they really, really boogered the whole thing up. And the question that I have is, will they learn from it? Or will we do more of what Trump does really, really well, which is to grab onto a message, which is the greatest response ever. No one's ever handled a hurricane like we have. It was a tremendous response. It was, you know, it was amazing, and we were the greatest, and I did it alone, and, you know, all that stuff, because I threw the paper towels out. And our news media will report on it for a couple minutes, and then we'll, like a cat chasing a string, we'll forget about something else. To me, that's the question. But if you're in North Carolina, if you're in South Carolina, the hope is that you've gotten out. that you have gathered the sheep and gotten the flock out, and that the help will be there when you need it. Judging from what we saw in Puerto Rico, I don't have great hope. But our thoughts are with you. Anyway, that's about where I can go with that. It's sad. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you're going. As always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tide flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is colored to the